Welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. We have a guest returning for the third time. We have Mark D. White. He's professor and chair of the Department of Philosophy at the College of Staten Island, CUNY, where he teaches courses in philosophy, economics, and law, and is also a member of the economics faculty at the Graduate Center of CUNY. He's the author of A Philosopher Reads Marvel Comics' Thor, A Philosopher Reads Marvel Comics' Civil War, the virtues of Captain America, and Batman and Ethics. And his newest book, available now, is called A Philosopher Reads Marvel Comics' Daredevil, From the Beginning to Born Again. Mark, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's great to be back, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we usually do, here's a passage from Mark's book. Mark wrote, Matthew Murdoch is famously a man of contrasts. He was an only child raised in poverty and growing up to become a successful lawyer, largely due to a single father, a boxer and part-time mob enforcer who pushed his son to study rather than fight. Matt was blinded by a freak accident that also heightened his other senses, granting him a range and depth of perception that sighted people can only dream of. He uses these senses, together with fighting skills acquired in violation of his father's wishes, to fight crime as the costumed vigilante Daredevil, and in the process regularly violates laws he has sworn to uphold as a member of the bar. Beneath the surface, we discover even more fascinating conflicts. He is perpetually unsettled about who he is or who he should be. Matt Murdoch, or Daredevil, man or hero, lawyer or vigilante. He is obsessively concerned with whether he makes a positive contribution as Daredevil or does quote unquote good for the world. And assuming he does, he questions whether that good is his true motivation for doing it. He places a high value on rules, but repeatedly finds himself in the position of breaking them. And even when he can justify doing this, he worries about the justification itself and what it means that he had to find a justification at all. Exhausting. Most superheroes struggle from time to time with who they are and what they're doing, but none as unrelentingly as Daredevil. And as soon as he comes to some resolution, something inevitably happens to make him doubt himself once again. All of these conflicts help to create one of the most dramatic characters in superhero comics. So I love that, man. He's a philosopher. He's essentially doing, and I would argue even somewhat of a psychotherapist too, which I'll get into a little bit later. But he is a philosopher because he's constantly wondering. And I think this is where we often fall into the trap of, in terms of ethical thinking, we fall into the trap of thinking, well, there's excuses for everything, right? It's like, I can do this, but there has to be a good reason. Who gets to decide that good reason, right? So can we talk a little bit about some of the philosophical aspects of his thinking and why it's important, first of all, A, for him to be a good person, and then also B, why doesn't he think the law can just do it on its own? Why do we need him as a vigilante?
Why does he feel it's important to be a good person?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's just the way his father raised him. I mean, his father was in his own mind an underachiever. He never did well in school. He became a boxer because that was basically the only thing he was good at. And using his fists and being a tough guy was also good for serving the mob, the criminals that he beat up people to collect their money, typically that we are familiar with. And I think he felt a certain sense of shame for this, that's all he made of his life, especially the criminal side of his life. So he wanted Matt to be better. As most parents do. They want their kid, they learn from their own mistakes. They want their kids to do better than them. And since Matt's father, Jack, thought he had failed in certain aspects of his life, he wanted to make sure Matt didn't. So he pressed Matt to study hard, not fight, not even play very much with his friends, just buckle down and hopefully be better in that aspect of his life than his father was. And his father also, being I always read him as being a generally ethical guy, aside from his kind of criminal sideline, which he was never comfortable with.
True.
And in fact, as the classic origin goes, the last night of his life, he was in a fight that he was told by his bosses to throw to serve their gambling ends. But then he realized Matt was in the audience cheering for him. And he says, I can't throw the fight. I can't show my son this is how you do, you have to do what's right. I have to fight fair according to the rules. And then he wins the fight, but gets killed by his boss afterwards. So, and also, we find out later, Matt's mother is absent from the first many years of stories. And it's implied that she's gone, that she's dead. But actually it comes out later that she just left the family when Matt was very young, and we don't find that out why for decades later. But she's actually a nun in a church in New York City, that when Matt gets injured, he ends up being taken to that church to recover and is cared for by that nun. That then, using his senses, he starts to realize, when he hears her voice, when he, other clues that he picks up on, that that's actually his mother. And even that they teased out in the comics for many years, whether that was or was not his mother.
Mm.
Which
And
is a
so
great way.
you can say that, even though she didn't spend much time in his life, maybe the fact that she was drawn to religious orders after she left the family, that she instilled some sense of that burgeoning ethics in him also when he was small.
Yeah, it's actually really good storytelling. I'm not gonna. I don't know if anybody knows this about me, anyone in the audience, but I'm
You're the
huge
Daredevil?
Marvel.
You're the Daredevil.
I'm the Daredevil. Actually, you know what's funny? Okay, actually, I was gonna say something different, but I was gonna say this to you before we started the podcast. But I was like, I need to save this for the podcast. Are you? Because you have a background in economics and law. You decided to. You write a lot of Marvel related books, right? And I don't know. I was thinking, like, are you secretly? Maybe. Are you secretly Daredevil?
Well, not only it's not a secret anymore. Jeez,
Yeah, my bad. Yeah.
there we go. Everyone knows
No.
now.
Daredevil had to have been a philosopher.
I can
I
stop
think
fighting it.
so. But one thing I love about the book is that you actually go into a lot of different philosophical underpinnings in regards to in relation rather to Daredevil's character. Like I wrote it down. I actually have a bunch of notes, but so like the dichotomy of justice and law, identity and personal ethics, virtue ethics, responsibility and power, existentialism and self-reflection, like his own trying to live a normal life and also
Mhm.
balance that with his life as a hero, right? And then also getting into Kantian ethics, right? Like uh his like on one level, um he has it feels like there's like a duty that he has to be a hero, right? But the thing is, um the duty that he feels in moral intentions, it actually ends up complicating his life because there are things he would do where like for example, you bring up in the book the trolley problem, or
Mhm.
rather his life in relation to that. It's like sometimes he has to pick one of maybe a lesser evil, or like no matter what choice he makes, somebody ends up getting hurt.
Yep.
Right.
And then
Right.
that conflict, it's very interesting to see that.
Oh,
Be-
can I piggyback
yeah,
off of
please,
that?
please.
Oh, okay. So I want to actually now go back to one of the three original questions. So if that's the case, right? If sort of all of these decisions, especially ethical ones, they have these trade-offs, why is it that he thinks that justice or the law isn't enough? Why does he think he thinks he has to be a vigilante? And again, why are there even justifications for, let's say, skirting the law in some sort of way? Why is that even necessary in this world?
Okay, and that's one of the core conflicts, is because I think I start out the book talking about how Matt Murdock has a almost preternatural devotion to rules. He thinks rules because, I mean, he saw his dad, and there's a pivotal scene where his dad loses control and hits him, and immediately apologizes and starts crying. I didn't mean to do this, Matt. I'm sorry, Matt. But the story goes that at that point Matt realized how important rules are to restrain us, because we're all imperfect. This is also sort of his Catholic upbringing that would only be emphasized later in the comics, already showing itself early on, that we're all flawed, we're all fallen, we're all imperfect, and we need rules to help keep us in check. And even though he thought his dad is generally a very upstanding person, even he lost control, and he needed rules to keep that in check. So that's why, according to the story, he becomes an attorney to help enforce the rules of society. But he also knows that those rules themselves are imperfect. The law is imperfect. The law is sorry, the law has been developed over the centuries by people, for good reason, for bad reason, for principled reasons, for policy reasons, for personal reasons, for manipulative reasons. the law, I teach this paper by Oliver Wendell Holmes, the famous Supreme Court justice, called The Path of the Law, where he talks about how, in law schools, they teach that the law has a certain structure. It's private and public law and tort and property and contract and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And he says, we have to remember that the law wasn't handed down to us like the Ten Commandments and, it was given the structure. We, in other words, human beings, have come to, the problem of regulating behavior and develop these laws in a very haphazard, chaotic way. And only later do we try to impose some sort of structure or organization to it.
Mhm.
And Matt realizes that even though rules can generally do good, there are cases in which they don't. Okay, criminals, escape conviction through a technicality that's generally motivated for good reasons to protect civil rights, but on occasion it will let, a guilty person go. And so he considers the other side of himself, the daredevil side, as pursuing a broader, more general sense of justice that the law is only an imperfect human approximation of.
Hmm.
So in other words, even in the most ideal case where we consider all lawmakers to have this idea of justice when they're forming these laws, writing laws, passing judicial decisions, whatever, even if they tried to do that perfectly, they couldn't. You can't design a perfect legal system. And even though Matt, believes in the law and tries to do most of his good works through the law, he realizes that it has limits. The law is like I said, an imperfect approximation of justice. So as Daredevil, he kind of handles the stuff that falls through the cracks.
Right, and even characters like I'll just use Kingpin as an example, right? Has evaded the law throughout most of the series. Even if somebody were to testify against him, he would have them killed, right? So this way they aren't able to, and therefore, obstructing that process. It does make sense that Daredevil, goes for acts in order to, get in between the cracks, as you say, right? In order to deal with the villains that the law can't actually get to. The thing is, though, that it's hard to see with Matt's character, with Daredevil's character, rather. Uh, the thing is that a lot of things that he does as Daredevil, it's hard to see whether, like, sometimes he's doing actions out of duty or whether it's just personal motivations, right? Like sometimes you look at his character, it looks like a lot of his actions are fueled by maybe anger, or sometimes revenge. Like um uh, Elektra, for example, the character Elektra, who was murdered by Bullseye, right? Like, um, I mean, when he went after Bullseye, by the way, I don't remember this clearly, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, did Daredevil kill Bullseye, or that just he ended up dying somehow, but it wasn't Daredevil's fault?
It was left very vague,
Yeah.
in the original comics. I think that was brilliantly done by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson, who were the writer and penciler and inker of that book. In that, he's fighting, if I remember this correctly, he's fighting Bullseye kind of balanced on a clothesline, and Bullseye falls off and he tries to catch him. But then Bullseye takes the sword, the sai that he killed Elektra with, and is poised to stab Daredevil in the hand.
Mm.
And then Daredevil drops him, but we don't know whether he dropped him because Bullseye stabbed him in the hand, or whether he dropped him to save being stabbed in the hand, or whether he just dropped him and used the impending stabbing as an excuse. And so that was left completely vague. And I thought that was brilliant because we'll never know, and Matt may never know, because we rarely know the true motivations for why we do things. There's so many things going on in our head that and it's a guy that gets back to your point, Alan, is that so many of the things just in general that Daredevil does, it could be done as in a pursuit of justice. It could be done to get a bad guy for personal reasons. It could be done because he enjoys it. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book is that Daredevil is one of the few superheroes that actually enjoys what he does.
Mhm.
That this is fun, he gets a kick out of it, and being Matt Murdock, being the obsessively reflective person that he worries if that's the real reason he does it, if he's not doing it for the sake of duty and justice, but if he's doing it simply because it's fun.
Yeah, and that causes a huge tension
Mm-hmm.
inside himself, right? Because like ideally he thinks of himself as, doing this out of like just for purely for justice, right? Like he has
Right.
a certain code, and he thinks he's doing things that are, for the right reasons. The thing is that the times that he questions himself, it kind of gets into like he starts to question like his own ethics in a way. I mean, there's even times in the story where he even considers not even being Daredevil anymore, right? Because
Oh, a lot. Yeah.
yeah, it leads to people dying. Like, I mean, you could argue. I mean, it's not really his fault, but you could argue that what happened with one of his love interests, Heather Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I mean, he had a great relationship with her, but the thing is that his dealings with her father, who was in the mob, um, yeah, it led to her father's death, which then led to her becoming an alcoholic, and then committing suicide, which left Matt very, very depressed, right?
Right.
And then also making him think like, wow, like is it worth being this person who might be doing more harm than good, at least that's like one of the phases that he goes through.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Yeah, and even just thinking about it, in terms of let's say let's say a long-term perspective. So then, I mean, again, when we're thinking about ethical questions, right, and we're often saying, well, society at large gets to decide what is and isn't right. I mean, that's why we do have a judicial system and a criminal system. So why is it that in his mind he thinks, okay, I'm gonna be the one to not fuck this up. Like they're the ones making the mistakes, and I'm gonna be the one to correct it. Like, where does that come into play? Why does he think that he should have that kind of power?
That's a great question. I think that's one of the questions that, there's a passage I quote in the book where he actually complains to himself, one of his internal monologues or soliloquies, where he says, why do I have to be the one to be the master of right and wrong? Why do I always have to be the person to sort these things out? And I mean, I just speculate, but it may be his training in the law,
Hmm.
which is it's same as being trained as a moral philosopher. You we flatter ourselves, I guess, to think we have a better bird's eye view of right and wrong or good or bad than the average person has.
Yes.
Simply because, oh, thank you. Simply because we spend a lot of time thinking about this and reading and writing but so that may be why, or the fact, another source of his sense of, like most heroes, he has an oversized sense of responsibility, like the story that Alan was talking about, Heather, her father, Heather's own, taking her life, and he feels responsible for all of this, even though there are a lot of factors, and he played at most an incidental view. And he feels he takes on everything again because of this underlying idea that he's responsible for it all.
Hmm.
And part of this comes from, I think, the accident that gave him his powers. Part of him believes that this was divine intervention, and that God gave him these abilities and gave them these abilities for a reason. Or you can just fall back on the Spider-Man thing, that with great power comes great responsibility. And he for whatever reason, he was given these abilities, he has to use them. Like
Right.
every hero of the Fantastic Four gets hit by cosmic rays, we have to use our abilities to help people.
Hmm.
And so I would, the question of why Matt thinks he's responsible for this is an even deeper issue that I don't really have the complete answer for.
Well, I want to ask about a perspective, and to play
Okay.
Daredevil's advocate. That one, I had to drop that one in somewhere. So,
All right.
do you think it's at least possible that he had an outsized ego? Because, okay, let's say he does have these abilities. Fine, I'll grant him that. But it's like also, I mean, there's a whole society around you creating these laws, right? Why not work within or try to work within the system, unless he thought the system was corrupt? Which, I mean, you do tend to get this with narcissistic personalities, where you think, the institutions are corrupt. I'm the one who knows what's good.
Okay. One thing though.
Oh, you're also playing Daredevil's advocate?
No, no. In the actual, okay, but there are clear illustrations of real corruption going on around him. Even as a lawyer, he's just seeing people get off on get off of being being made guilty for crimes. He sees so much corruption that it's just apparent, right? It's not like just his imagining.
Oh, so it is
Right.
a problem. It's a systemic issue then.
Correct. And okay, so I guess you could argue, oh, well, then shouldn't he get in somewhere and then try to change the system? I suppose.
That would be cool.
I suppose.
Mhm.
But Mark, back to your point, it's again, he has this great power, right? And again, just like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. He sees that these people are falling through the cracks, people who are not actually facing true justice. And so he decides to take matters into his own hands. Now, is that right?
That's the
good
question.
Yeah.
That's the wait. Yeah. So, Mark, so then how does he deal with these internal justifications, right? So, as philosophers, I know would agree. I'm assuming. You would say, okay, the way we philosophize is we philosophize together. It's not just me sitting in my armchair and writing and saying I know what's good and what's bad. We do this together. But he, on the other hand, is saying, no, I'm going to figure out what's right and wrong. So why doesn't he again create these or try to create these justifications with other people? Why doesn't he ask for advice? Why doesn't he ask for help? Why isn't there like a super league of other people in the original, I guess, comic book before the movies and everything? Yeah.
Well, wow, there's a lot to touch on there. For one, as far as working with our superheroes, Daredevil has almost exclusively been a lone wolf in the comics. He's never been he's worked with the Fantastic Four and worked with the Avengers, but he's never been a member of any of them. And there's a handful of heroes. Spider-Man he teams up with a lot. Black Widow he teamed up with regularly for a few years, professionally and romantically. The other street level heroes in New York, like Luke Cage and Iron Fist, it's similar to in the Netflix series, The Defenders all teamed up. But he's been very much a solitary hero. And to bring this into your question of why he takes this all on himself to determine what's right and wrong, that's actually very consistent with Kantian ethics, where Kant says that each of us has to determine for ourselves what right and wrong are. When we do that, we'll all come to the same idea that he had, but since he thinks he came to his idea through rational thinking, he assumes that everyone would come to that same idea if they use their rational thinking the same way. So that's why when he explains his categorical imperative and explains it and everything, he's saying this is the natural conclusion that anyone would come to if they thought about it. But it's each person's responsibility to think of this for themselves, because it violates autonomy to just take someone else's word for what's right or wrong.
You kind of proved a little bit what I'm saying. So that does mean he's superior to the rest of society.
Well, not. I don't think that means you're superior. That just means that because he might think that everyone else would come to the same conclusion,
even though they haven't.
Even though they haven't yet.
I mean, other superheroes.
Maybe if he thinks he was the first one that did or the best one that did, and then he takes it on himself to act on this.
Okay, but yes, and then also, just to say this, I mean, if we're talking about the world of superheroes, other superheroes have come to that conclusion. I wouldn't say all of them. Some of them do kill and and that's against.
So they're part of an elite secret society?
There actually is an elite secret society
You guys
in
are spoiling the
Marvel.
secrets again. Come on, you know.
Yeah.
No, so I'm kind of messing with you guys, but also like it's hard for me not to have my clinician's cap on. I mean, because at
Mhm.
the end of the day, I mean, what we want is we want a culture, I think, in a society where people work together as opposed to having vigilantism. And I mean,
Right.
and I wonder if you thought about this, Mark, but like I know now I kind of wonder if I should ask this, but do you feel,
Go
oh man,
ahead.
maybe this is kind of a difficult question, but do you feel like in terms of what we see on the right and some of the stuff that happened with January 6th and the kind of the militantism, the vigilantism, do you feel like a lot of that in some ways is supported by like texts like superhero texts, where the thinking for a lot of these folks is, well, yeah, of course, if the government is corrupt, which they obviously all believe it is, and society as a whole is corrupt, then it's up to us to figure out what's just. I mean, that I would argue that is what January 6th was. So I don't know. It's kind of like it's easy to see the connection there.
Yeah, that you have a great point. And I remember I did a Captain America podcast a while ago. And there's that famous speech that Captain America gives during Civil War when he's trying to get Spider-Man over to his side. And Spider-Man asks him, how do you keep focused on what's right when everyone disagrees with you? And I used to be able to do this from memory, but you put me on the spot. But he says, just when the whole mob's against you and the public's against you and the press is against you and your friends are against you, if you believe you're right, you plant your feet like a tree beside the river of the truth, and if they say move, you say no, you move. Something like that. Thank you. And the person I was doing the podcast with, the Captain America Fans podcast, said, but couldn't anybody use that to justify their actions, which you like you just mentioned, the January 6th participants. And yeah, that's true. That's true. But that's why just that idea of doing what you believe is right is just merely a formal notion if you divorce it from a sound idea of what's right itself.
Mm.
I mean, because every villain thinks they're doing the right thing. Every comic book villain I'm talking about. And Dr. Doom always says, I'm trying to take over the world because I can honestly run it better than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great comic called Doom War where he's trying to break into the vibranium vaults in Wakanda that are protected by the Panther God that gives Black Panther his abilities. And he has to face the Panther God, and the Panther God has to assess that his intentions are pure. And so Doom takes all his armor off, stands naked, and says, assess me. And the Panther God looks into his soul and says, it's ugly in there, but your intentions are pure. You honestly think you can run the world better than anyone else. Welcome to the vault. And that's how Doom gets all the vibranium.
That's cool.
But that doesn't mean, but you can still judge those goals and
Right.
Doom's purity of heart as being wrong. So just because someone believes they're right and acts on that's a fairly thin notion without some underlying value of whether they are right or not.
Oh, can I ask you another?
Again, in the Captain America book, I talk about this in terms of integrity, that there's a thin version of integrity that just means your actions are consistent with your beliefs. But then there's a thicker version of integrity that says those beliefs have to actually have moral validity.
Right.
And that's where the community comes in. And that's where other people judging whether, one person may think they're right in doing something, but if everyone else disagrees, that's I hate to disagree with Kat, but that's at least a reason to ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? And you may come to the conclusion, as Captain America would, that yes, I am doing the right thing, and this will be shown in the end. But when you deal with Captain America, I mean, just to contrast Captain America and Daredevil, you're dealing with Daredevil, is Captain America has doubts, but probably fewer doubts than most of us. Daredevil is a man of doubts because he's got so many internal conflicts and contrasts that he nearly doubts everything. And this is what I've been writing lately about in my Psychology Today posts, is that doubting yourself and questioning yourself on occasion is a good thing. But when you do it constantly and you don't have any confidence in your ongoing mission that you're doing the right thing, it's hard to go forward with your life if you're constantly questioning it.
Oh, and it's OCD, by the way.
And it's OCD, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been called what would you call it? Just I want to get the framing right. So it's been called the disorder of self-confidence, where the person is constantly obsessing because they don't believe that they can function in the world. They can probably take care of themselves. Essentially, that they need everything outlined for them because they don't believe that they could deal with calamity and catastrophes. Yeah.
And actually, while we're on this topic, it's actually something good to discuss. Why is it healthy sometimes to doubt yourself? Not obviously not to the level or extent that Daredevil does, but why would you consider that healthy?
Well, if you remember in the Thor book, we're just covering everything today. In the
Wait till
Thor
we
book,
get to antitrust.
until we get to antitrust, then we're way out there. But in the Thor book, I concluded that he's worthy because he never takes his worth for granted, because he never takes his goodness for granted. And that having to question yourself, in one sense, it displays a healthy amount of humility, that you don't just accept and take for granted that you're always doing the right thing. You every once in a while you have to look, such as when everyone is against you and you kind of have to wonder, why are all these people wrong? Is it just me? That Principal Skinner meme from The Simpsons, that everyone else disagrees with me. Is it them or is it me? No, it's them. Of course it's them. And so the questioning yourself on occasion just reflects that basic sound level of humility that says, let me just make sure I'm doing the right thing here, especially before making a significant choice that's going to affect a lot of other people. Let me make sure I'm doing the right thing here.
Yeah.
And like I said, Captain America does this on occasion when he's facing a heavy decision. Am I doing the right thing? And then, of course, what makes Captain America different is once he decides it's the right thing, he goes forward with it, and no one's going to stop him unless they can convince him he's wrong. And if he's convinced he's wrong, he'll stop. But it's when you question everything you do because you've lost confidence in your basic underlying power of judgment. And like Leon said, it's OCD. It's, as I understand it, that you rely on kind of this external scaffolding to structure your decision making because you don't trust yourself to make these immediate judgments. Is that on base of what you're saying?
And it seems like also with the Daredevil, I mean, there's a sense of rugged individualism where he thinks, since you're using Kant as a framework here, it seems like he's the one who has to figure it out on his own, as though there's some moral imperative or objective that says, okay, you as a person, as an ethical being, you need to stop relying on people and you need to figure this out on your own, because again, ultimately we're all coming to the same conclusions anyway. Why that's, to me at least, why that's kind of troubling is even with OCD. So sometimes people think that when you go to therapy, you're becoming this wholly independent person. So sometimes when people come in and they say, well, I have OCD.
Wholly independent or dependent?
No, they want to become wholly independent.
Oh, they want to. Okay,
they want to. Yeah. So because they think that they're completely dependent. So like, let's say a client will say something like, well, let's say it's a she, because I don't know, whatever. I'm just picking. So let's say she comes in and she says, well, like I depend on my husband a lot for my decision making, right? So I can't make a decision without him, And so let's say when they come to therapy, they say something like, well, I want to be able to make decisions on my own. So often what that means for people is I want to only make decisions on my own, which is not a great way of living.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why I wonder, when thinking about the Daredevil, is that what he wanted? Is it that he wanted an inner and an internal resolution on his own to say, again, using the Kant framework, I'm supposed to figure this out on my own because there's a sort of a rational or natural way to do this. Whereas I would say it's kind of antithetical to OCD therapy, because what we're doing as clinicians, as whomever is helping somebody with OCD, is we're helping a person, first of all, not only, yes, become independent to some extent, meaning not excessively ask people for advice and for help. Absolutely. Right. But it's also to get themselves to see that, okay, we can actually ask for help in a way that's not tormenting our relationships and our partners, that we can actually elicit help and then find ways internally to self-soothe after we get it. So the problem with OCD in particular is not that people ask for help, it's just that they do it excessively, that they want so much reassurance and so much validation. So the point is that they don't really know how to get their needs met in a healthy way. So I wonder, for the Daredevil, he went all the way to the other end. He went from, oh, cool, like I don't want to be super dependent on people, so let me just not need them at all. Let me just torture myself with these obsessions and these ruminations in order to figure this out on my own. When I would argue that's going back to the system, unless it's completely corrupt, you should be able to work within that framework to especially achieve something like justice.
Well, but he does. Again, you throw so much out, Leon. I should be taking notes. He does work in the system. I mean, this is one thing I don't want to exaggerate, and if I have done so, I apologize. He does. He hasn't thrown out the law, and he's just going on its own. That's the Punisher. That's the Punisher who said the justice system is lost. I'm going to go out and I'm going to solve crime by killing all the criminals. That's obviously the extreme end. Daredevil, again, has a basic underlying faith in the law, and he still does as much as he can through the law. But when that runs out, when he's exhausted all the legal remedies, then he goes out as Daredevil and, bends the law to try to pick up the little bits of justice that are left out by the law. So I don't think he's abandoned it so much as he tries to work within the system as much as he can. But, he realizes when he can't. And to go back to the Kant thing, Kant, the Kantian concept of autonomy, that you make your own decisions based on your own values and consistent with your own character. That doesn't mean that you can't accept help or advice or consider other people's points of view. You just never take them verbatim as what's right or wrong. So in other words, once you reach moral maturity, obviously children have to listen to what their parents and their teachers and everything say. But once you reach moral maturity, someday, you have to, even if you accept outside advice or influence, you can do that, but you have to judge for yourself whether that's right. And so at the end, it's your own decision.
No.
Because if you're going to accept a belief or perform an action that you believe is right, you have to have convinced yourself that it's right, not just what somebody told you to do. But that doesn't mean that you can't listen to anybody else. You just can't listen to them unreflectively. Now, I'm not saying that Matt does that, because, again, Matt is the lone wolf. Matt has figured out, as you point out, that he thinks he knows what right or wrong is. But again, he's not utterly confident in that, because he questions that. He questions everything. And I mean, one thing that I don't think has been mentioned is this book only covers the first 20, 25, give or take, years of Daredevil's comic book history. I start from the first issue and I go through the end of Frank Miller's second run, the Born Again story. And through this entire run, if you read through it, instead of 1 month at a time, but you just read through it as I did to get ready for this book, most of which I'd read before, some bits I hadn't, and you kind of get the picture of his whole, early years. It's just so back and forth. I'm gonna give up being Daredevil. Okay, I have to be Daredevil. Next issue, I have to give up being Daredevil. At the end of that issue, I'm gonna be Daredevil. I'm gonna tell Karen who I am so I can propose to her. I can't tell Karen who I am. I'm gonna tell Foggy who I am. Oh, I can't tell Foggy who I am. I'm gonna do this. No, I can't do that. And it's just, I almost get dizzy reading it. And admittedly, this was something going on month to month or every 2 months in the comics while it was being published that way. And I read it in continuous succession. But it is very much a roller coaster ride. And I think that gives a good picture of Matt's mental state, not being able to settle on, okay, this is the path I'm taking. I'm convinced, at least for the time being, this is the right path, and I'm going to move forward with this until I have a good reason to question it. Not just till the end of the issue when I start questioning it. But, Alan mentioned earlier how he flip-flops between, should I be Daredevil? Should I not be Daredevil? Or the eternal question that many superheroes face, is the real me Matt Murdock, or am I really Daredevil? Which one is the mask? Which one is the real person? And even the number of times just in this first 25 years of comics that he fakes his own death to try to solve some complication with his identity, or he just wants to be Daredevil, so he fakes Matt Murdock's death, or he just wants to be Matt Murdock, so he fakes Daredevil's death, or tells people it's his brother is Daredevil. It's somewhat soap operatic, Comics are often compared to soap operas because of the ongoing storylines and interweaving plot threads and everything. And this is add all these complications to the overwrought dramatic dialogue, especially in the early years when Stan Lee was scripting it, and it's very soap opera. And the fact that Matt is such a passionate person, not only about what he does, and that's part of why he questions it, is because he's so passionate about it. He does not want to get this wrong, but maybe he is. Maybe he has to question it. He's never settled on it. But he is also a very romantic guy. He has a lot, just in that first 25 years, he goes through a number of love interests.
Mm-hmm.
He's had even more since. And this itself is a conflict with him because, of course, any woman that he gets involved with, he's putting into danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do I break up with her? Do I stop being Daredevil? What do I do? And again, to get back to what I was saying in the beginning, he flip-flops between these within one issue. One of my Psych Today blog posts was about how this oversized sense of responsibility leads him to question what he's doing. Am I doing enough good? Maybe I should stop doing this. I'm hurting people. I'm putting people at risk. He's ignoring the good he does, just focusing on the bad.
Mm-hmm.
But then he saves somebody, and then at the end of the issue, he says, "Okay, I'm doing the right thing. I should be Daredevil. The world needs a Daredevil." And then the next issue, he's doubting himself again, and it's just ongoing cycle that just can't be good for him,
Mm.
And it's not just the first 25 years. This continues on through the rest of the series. I stopped about 86, I think. So there's been almost 40 years of stories since then that have continued in the same vein. Which and I think from the passage you read, one of the most dramatic characters, because he's always like that. And again, it's not just like I say when I write about Batman. He's also a very conflicted character, which is horrible for him, but it's great for the readers. It's great for the fans. It's great for the writers who get to write this Shakespearean drama. And when we try to connect with the person and himself as if he were a real person, he's not like I paint Captain America as a moral exemplar, someone you can look up to and try to emulate.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Batman, Daredevil is not somebody you want to, at least with his totality of his personality, not somebody you want to emulate, because some of his characteristics are unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's a super cool character. I mean, when I was younger, and I know the Daredevil movie gets a lot of crap, like it wasn't really good, but I was young enough to not be that much of a movie critic, I guess, when I saw it. So I thought it was cool. I thought Ben Affleck was, not bad. Jennifer Gardner's Elektra, all that. I thought Bullseye was a little sometimes corny or whatever, but I think they did the comedy.
It was corny.
Okay.
I mean, it was corny, but in a good way. It didn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah.
It was kind of in between the 60s Batman series and the Christopher Nolan trilogy. Nolan's Batman took itself super seriously, and the 60s Batman was obviously silly.
Right.
But I thought the movie Daredevil, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the Daredevil movie, but when I watch it, it's kind of like the first two Fantastic Four movies, in that they're fun.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to come in as a strict, comic book, this has to be absolutely according to continuity, then or it has to be super dramatic or super serious, or it's not gonna work for you. But I'm one of the few Fantastic Four fans online that will actually speak up for the first two movies as just being a lot of fun. And that's what I think the Fantastic Four should be, is a lot of fun, have a lot of heart, a lot of depth, but on the surface it should be a lot of fun. And I thought those movies were.
I like the second Fantastic Four actually in particular, like when they introduced the Silver Surfer. I thought that was actually done well enough, as far as, a Marvel movie could go.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I thought it would have been cool if they actually kind of continued with like that particular cast. Although I guess it would have made it complicated with Captain America and it's the same actor. So yeah, I could see that being an issue. But then the Fantastic Four movies that came out after that, I didn't. So to be fair, I didn't watch them. So
Good.
that's not right. Like I should, I guess, watch it and then judge
Yeah.
it. But I don't know. I guess it didn't continue for a reason. I don't know if you saw it, but what
Yeah.
did you
I
think?
saw it opening night.
Was it bad?
It
Not
was
good?
bad.
Yeah.
It was
Eh,
bad. It's
yeah.
one of these things. I know I wrote about it at the time, and I haven't actually thought about it much, but it seemed to be, and I'm not blaming anyone in particular. It could have been the studio, it could have been Marvel, it could have been, Fox had the rights at the time. Fox Studios and Marvel never got along, so who knows what backroom dealings were responsible for this. But it's one of these movie treatments that almost seems ashamed of the source material.
Hmm.
Like
Mm.
take Ben Grimm, The Thing. One of his famous catchphrases is clobbering time. Whenever he's ready to tackle some big monster or something, it's clobbering time.
Mm.
That's one of those, when you read that in issue, all the fans' hearts light up.
Mhm.
It's, oh boy, this is where the fun starts.
Yeah.
But in the movie, in the last movie, uh, they it was I can't remember if it was his brother beating him when he was a little boy or their father, but whoever was beating Ben said that phrase, it's clobbering time, and then he beat
Hmm.
him. So
Wow.
now this wonderful catchphrase, this beloved catchphrase, ends up being, a legacy of family violence when he was a young boy.
Mhm.
Damn.
Now, luckily, that was forgotten. But I mean, can you imagine if that had been established as canon, and then every time you read that in a comic, you had to think about that?
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not saying that that
Sure. No.
superheroes behavior can never be rooted in childhood trauma. I mean, Bruce Wayne obviously being the main example, but Fantastic Four, like I said, it's to me, it's properly a big four-color, bright, fantastic adventure with superheroics and occasional tragedy built into it. But that was just building in the tragedy to someone who really didn't need it. I mean, the fact that Ben Grimm turns into this rock monster, that's the tragedy. That's enough.
Yeah.
This didn't have to be emphasized or have imposed on it childhood trauma also.
Hmm.
You can have this wonderful happy kid that grows up to be a well-adjusted adult, and then he's turned into a rock monster, and that changes his whole world. That's all you need.
Honestly, that is enough. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, you're right. I'm happy it wasn't established either. Yeah, making that like related to abuse, that would just kind of change the taste,
Yeah.
especially for people who are big comic fans. To be like, oh, okay, no, don't take that phrase. Like we need that to still be around and have it be fun, of course.
Right. And that
Uh,
I think that's in the first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie. And I just sat there and thinking, oh my God, this is,
it's
where is this going
cringe.
to go from here?
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to say anything bad about any of the actors in the film. They all did a great job with what they were given. And, but it was I mean, everyone complains about how the last Batman movie was so dark. Well, it's a Batman movie,
Hmm.
but this last Fantastic Four movie was not the same. I mean, visually dark.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not, at least they did
Sure.
abandon. I read that an early idea for Doctor Doom was to have him be an angry blogger.
No. I don't like that at all. That's
I mean,
funny,
that's just
but
it's
man,
trying to make it, I guess, hip and edgy
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and
Mhm.
contemporary, but
2023 version of Doctor Doom. I don't know.
yeah.
No, I like what if they do Secret Wars properly, I think that's gonna be cool. Like you throw in Doctor Doom, Kang, maybe they'll take out Kang, make Doctor Doom the main bad guy, bring
Right.
back a whole bunch of old superheroes. That could be really cool. Um,
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to do though, is I wanted to ask you actually, um, something I noticed while I was reading the book is so I've already seen the Netflix version of Daredevil,
Okay.
right? And when I'm reading it, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty like this is actually really related to the story. Not like all the characters, but it's related to that show, like especially the born again concept, right?
Oh
Because
yeah.
yeah, he does end up meeting his mom, who's a nun, and
Mhm.
that's revealed there. and then him kind of getting his inspiration back to be Daredevil again. What do you think about the Netflix show, and then also the next the reboot that's kind of coming out?
Oh, the Netflix show was amazing.
Yeah,
It was one of the best comic book adaptations that I think we've had. And
it
the
was
thing that,
dark.
and you know, in Leon's spirit to rely on community wisdom, the fact that the comic book community bought into the Netflix series so heavily that, I mean, I know lifelong Daredevil fans who now are bigger fans of the Netflix series than they are of what's going on
Wow.
currently in the comics, just
Hmm.
because whatever is happening to Daredevil in the comics may be better or worse, but this show just kind of cemented three significant, each season was 3 or 4 times the length of a movie, so you've got these three long extended treatments that were very, very loyal to the general conception of Matt Murdock in the comics. Again, they took some liberties with other characters, but Matt Murdock
Kingpin.
and the
Yeah.
Kingpin are there's a reason that Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio are so widely heralded for their performances. Is not just their performances, but what they had to work with as well.
Hmm.
But it's just tremendous. And I have friends. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a Save Daredevil movement.
Hmm.
With it a hashtag. They had petitions with hundreds of thousands of signatures that they presented to Marvel after the Netflix series was canceled. They said, bring him
Right.
back, bring
Yep.
the series back, bring Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio back. We want this Daredevil back.
Hmm.
And when they announced the 4th season, Charlie Cox himself credited the Save Daredevil movement with helping bring the show back. Without them, they may not have come back. So he thanked them personally for doing that.
Hmm.
And that's one of the arguments I used to pitch this book to the publisher. Was there is a tremendously active and passionate, just like Matt Murdock himself, passionate fan base for Daredevil.
Yep.
That is my one of the people in the movement is a longtime friend of mine, Christine Hannafalk, who wrote a book about the science of Daredevil. She is a scientist herself, and so she explored the whole idea of heightened senses when you lose one, and what could explain the radar sense, and animals like bats that have echolocation. Is this possible? And she really goes into all the details of how this might actually work in the real world, as well as exaggerations of it. Like when a writer says that Daredevil's radar sense can pick out color, and she says no, it can't pick out color. It picks out surfaces. And when it's one thing for Daredevil to hear someone talking through a wall, but to hear them talking on the other side of New York City, is ridiculous.
Right.
So I really recommend that book. And you saw her name. I mentioned her a few times in my book as too. She read an early draft and had some great comments on it.
Yeah, and just going back to the philosophy of it. So I remember from Thor, you said essentially we have to deal with the fact that it's an existential truth that you would wake up every morning and you would ask yourself, okay, what is it that I have to do to be good today, right? So it's something that you have to constantly keep revisiting. So would you say it's the same thing with Matt Murdock? Essentially, at some point, either he has or he has to learn that when it comes to something like obsessions, you have to live with this ambiguity of not really of making decisions and not really knowing whether it is or isn't the right one.
Right. He has to develop, I mean, ironically, for a man of faith, he has to develop faith in himself.
Mm-hmm.
That, in his mind, God gave him these abilities, and as well as his intelligence, to do what he believes is right. And he has to have that faith in himself to, again, until it's pointed out that he's doing wrong, that he is generally doing the right thing.
Yeah.
He has to believe in himself enough to do this.
Yeah, and I love that so much because that really is what OCD, a part of OCD treatment. So you would help the person through something like what's called a cognitive thought record. You'd help them see, okay, look, based on the data that you have now, you can obviously always ask for advice. But the point is to say that with the data that you have now, the advice isn't going to change. So let's say if we're sitting in session and the person says, okay, here are my options. Let's say we do an exercise where we help them decide what to do. At some point, you have to say, okay, well, you have to make the decision. So yes, if I were in your position based on everything that we went through with the data, yeah, I probably probably would have, most likely, if not completely, I would have made that decision as well. And then for some people, it feels like it's not enough because there's always the notion of missing data. What happens if I don't know enough? And then it's like, but yeah, but you're never going to know enough. So let's say if, a year from now, you find out something that you wouldn't have known then you're going to say, oh, thank God I didn't make that decision because here's this other piece of data. It's like, yeah, but that's only with hindsight. And so people fall for the hindsight bias. They say, oh, of course that was the wrong answer, or of course that was the right answer. And I love that notion of incomplete data, and also saying, because here's this person, and this is why I would definitely track OCD onto him. Here's this person who has an inordinate sense of responsibility. So with OCD, so there are two different versions of personalizing. So one version of personalizing is where you say, let's say I'm a bad person, this person hates me, such and such is happening because of me, right? Another version of it is actually taking too much responsibility for something, saying something like the world is, or the weight of the world is on my shoulders. Right. So when you have that version of personalizing, oftentimes that is OCD, where the person thinks, oh my God, I'm so responsible for this, and I'm so responsible for knowing all of this. And so when we're treating people with OCD, we essentially help them see that, like, yes, you may have these responsibilities, but you're not responsible for fucking knowing everything. You cannot have all of the data. So if you keep pushing off whatever decision, sure, maybe you'll get like a little bit of increments of, let's say, additional data, which is great, maybe, right? And then, but the problem is, it's like, when does it become a waste of your time? When does it get to the point where even a little bit of data won't help you? So let's say you made decision A over decision B. So, and let's say, if we're weighing it out, it's probably at this point, let's say, I don't know, I'm just going to assign some sort of quantity to it. There's like a 70% chance, let's say, that this is the right decision based on everything that we know, right? Is it worth continuously looking for more and more data when you have that kind of number? Some people will say yes. Some people will say, no, I want like 90 or 95%. But honestly, if they want that, they're usually full of shit and they want 100%. So then you're like, wait, what are you really after? So we're asking ourselves now about diminishing returns. So this is where often people struggle, where they think if I have more and more data, that's going to obviously make it more likely that I make the right decision. But the point is, and this is, I don't want to ramble on too much, but the point is that we're getting the person to see that, like, you are going to be held to the same level of accountability that, let's say, I would be held to. Meaning, if I were in your position and I were to make this decision, I wouldn't get probably the blowback that you're expecting from other people if you make a mistake. And then also, I'm not getting the sense of, let's say, or the retaliation or retribution that you think is coming. So for a lot of these people, and I'm assuming this is the case with Daredevil, he's thinking, if I fuck this up or if I make the mistake, people are going to blame me because in some case, I'm the one who has these powers. I'm the one who knows better. I'm maybe above the law, whatever, however you want to kind of conceptualizes. But the thing that we help people with OCDC is that you're actually not that powerful and you're not that responsible. Yeah, if you make a mistake, nobody's going to die, including you.
Right. Get over yourself.
Yeah, get over. Yeah. And that's kind of the sense that I get with Daredevil. Honestly, it's like, get over yourself, dude. Whether you're taking 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's probably give or take the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, a lot of times when he's beating himself up, like over, Heather Glenn's father and her taking their lives, and people are, and the funny thing is, both Foggy, his best friend Foggy, and Ben Urich, the journalist, ask him, do you feel responsible for this? I'm like, he doesn't need to be asked that. He does. But you're just kind of driving the nail in by asking, don't you feel responsible for this? And he's like, of course I do. But they shouldn't be. They should be, if they're true friends, they'd be saying it's not your fault. Yeah. It's this happened. It's horrible. It happened. You're going to think about it, but you couldn't have prevented this. And the tough part is when he has, what Alan mentioned before about tragic dilemmas, where you can't, you have two problems and you can't solve both, and you have to, the typical thing of having two people you can save, you can only save one, you have to let the other one go.
Right.
And he's going to save one, and then he's going to torture himself over the one he couldn't save. He's going to feel responsible for that, even though he literally could not do both.
Yes.
It's not Superman. Superman could find a way to do both. Daredevil probably can't.
Yep. Yeah.
And again, then he beats himself up over this. What you're saying about worrying about getting so much information. You're probably familiar with what economists call satisficing.
I remember vaguely.
Instead of trying to maximize, instead of trying to make all your decisions to maximize your well-being, when this would obviously take tremendously more information and deliberation time than you can afford to take, the preferred for many people, especially behavioral economists, driving from Herbert Simon's work in the 50s, talk about satisficing. you gather information as long as it's worthwhile to gather that information. You get all the information you reasonably can use. You don't worry about getting all the information. And they use the example like you go out, shopping for a new car. A car is a major purchase. So you may take a day or two to go around to the different dealers, drive different cars, and make a decision. You're not going to try out every car that exists. You're going to try out a decent number of cars so you know what's out there. So you're going to take some time. Buying a house, you can take a week searching properties to buy a house because that's worthwhile to get that information given the size of the purchase. If you're going out and buying a new toothbrush, you don't go and look at all the different toothbrushes and go to different stores to look at what toothbrushes they have. You just go buy a damn toothbrush because it doesn't matter. If you don't like that one, buy a different one next time. And economists also use this when we talk about dating. You can either keep dating people. You'll say you're dating with the goal towards settling down with somebody. You can keep dating people, never settle down with somebody because you're always thinking the next person may be even better. The next person may be even better. But, after a while, the satisficing approach says you should just, after you've dated enough people, you should just take stock of who you know and who's available and decide if it's worth settling down.
Yeah.
Because it's actually inefficient and actually lowers your well-being to keep looking, to keep deliberating, because then you're not actually, finishing the purchase in the case of a house or a car, or the relationship in the case of dating.
Yeah. And because there's a lot of catastrophizing involved with OCD, again, every decision feels like it's monumental. So the thinking there is, okay, if I take one over the other, even if it's like a little bit different, right? What am I going to do with all of the regret? How do I deal with the fact that I couldn't have chosen otherwise? And what's so interesting, and this is what I love about human beings, is that I think people really fail to see this, is that the interpretation, how the Buddha says, like, we are our reality to whatever extent. This is actually very true in terms of decision making. So people often fail to see that you're actually going to find a way to love your decision 9 times out of 10. So unless you obviously, are still struggling with OCD, if you haven't been able to develop that kind of framework, I mean, what's going to happen is actually 9 times out of 10, you're going to hate your decision because you're going to start thinking about all the good parts of what you were missing out on. But what normally people do, and I often frame this in terms of the experiment of, there's this famous experiment. I don't remember exactly who was, who did it or which psychologist did it, but it was like a taco and burrito experiment, right? It's like, what do you want? You want a taco or burrito? They're the fucking same thing, right? And it's like when the people pick a taco, they're like, oh my God, the burrito sucks, right? When they pick the burrito, they're like, the taco isn't even that good. So I think people fail to see that when they make a decision, they will find an exponentially a vast amount of reasons why that decision was the right one. The problem, I would argue, with something like OCD is people not only don't have that capability, but because there's a self-disdain there that they automatically always think that they make the wrong decision. So that interpretation colors their decision making. But the point is to say that nobody makes decisions that they're comfortable with. We just have the ability to not necessarily delude ourselves. I don't want to use that term, but we talk ourselves into thinking that we made the better decision. Like taco and burrito, bro. Like, really, you're gonna convince yourself that the taco sucks? Like, come on. We do this shit all the time with so many things. Oh, I'm happy I chose to do this thing this night over this other thing because of X, Y, and Z reasons. The problem is, again, going back to OCD, is it's the reverse. People tell themselves, oh, I should have done that because of those good reasons.
Yeah.
And I remember you wanted to ask about the antitrust.
Yeah, I think at this point, it's 12:41. I think we're
You sure?
Yeah, I mean, we could do another episode on it just in case if it does come up. No, it's already, because I don't want to like run through it in the whatever it is, 4 or 5 minutes. Just
Fair enough.
Yeah. So, okay. So just curious in terms of, okay, because I do want to ask, so as we start wrapping up, so in terms of the actual philosophical component, what would you want people, philosophers, lay people, potential students, right? What would you want them to take away in terms of the actual philosophy of Daredevil, his own thinking about it, his frameworks, conceptions of it? What would you want them to know about it?
Wow, that's, I wrote a book.
Yeah.
I when you're going over before, I can't remember which of you listed all the philosophical concepts I go through in the book.
Yeah,
I think it was Alan.
Yeah.
And I was struck by how many different concepts I touched on. Not that it's necessarily a good thing, but I'm comparing it to the Thor book, where the Thor book definitely had one theme, and the theme of worthiness, and what it means to feel worthy or be worthy, and what happens when you don't feel worthy, how you get it back. And I remember I touched on a number of topics when I went through that, but there was that one unifying theme through the book. And the Daredevil book is different. And so that's why I think when you listed all those topics, I don't think any one of them is dominant.
That's definitely true. Yeah.
So it's that makes the question very hard. What one philosophical idea would I want people to come away with about Daredevil, other than the Whitman phrase, "We all contain multitudes." But it's really the fact that I think he is defined by his conflicts. He is an internally tortured person, and that in itself is obviously a counterproductive thing.
Right.
And so, when I talk about Batman is much more settled, except for the not killing thing, because just like Daredevil and Bullseye, Batman's got the Joker, and as long as he lets the Joker live, the Joker's going to keep killing lots and lots of people. And so he's got that conflict. I can't kill him, but I'm trying to save everybody. My whole mission is about saving Gotham City from crime, but I'm letting this one person who's responsible for a large percentage of this crime keep doing it.
Right.
And that's his main conflict. And when people ask me, are you saying Batman should kill a Joker? I'm saying no, he shouldn't kill a Joker, but he should torture himself over it, because that gives him dramatic weight.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just that one aspect of Batman. The rest of them is pretty settled.
Right.
But Daredevil, all of him is internal conflict. And again, that makes for a massively dramatic character, but definitely not someone to be emulated. Someone to take, a lesson of what not to do.
Right.
He's not obsessed about all these things that you can't possibly do right. Obsessed about all these decisions, like Leon said, that he's second guessing them before he does them. He's second guessing them after he does them. He's wondering if he should be Daredevil anymore. Yes, I should. No, I shouldn't. Back and forth almost every issue. That's not a way to live.
What I'm
again, what I'm thinking I'm getting, because all this discussion about OCD, I just have a very elementary idea of OCD before this podcast. Now I'm an expert. But what I think I'm seeing is that he actually, the fact that he can't just accept that being Daredevil is the right thing to do and do it. You're saying that's a symptom of his OCD, and the fact that even when he reaffirms a decision that he's reaffirmed time and time again, and you think eventually he'd learn that this is probably the right, even just in terms of probability, the right thing to do, he can't accept that. I'm understanding that could be a symptom of OCD.
Right. Right. And what I also hear you saying is it kind of harkens back to my ethics and law class with Professor Stroop, who was obviously my mentor, where he said, listen, this is why, let's say deontology as opposed to utilitarianism, right? And even just other ethical schools of thought. It's so important for you to pretty much learn all of them, because at some point, going this concept of containing multitudes, you're going to be struck with these decisions of like, okay, which philosophical school do I apply? And then as you learn about, let's say, the drawbacks of this one as opposed to this one, and the drawbacks of this one as opposed to that one in specific instances, what you're learning is that you kind of have to know what you're doing. So what I hear you saying, or at least what I'm kind of inferring from it, is the point of, or maybe not the point, but a point of Daredevil is he has to understand that there are different ways of making decisions and there are different philosophical schools that can be applied. So I think what you're essentially saying is learn a lot of philosophy.
Yeah. That's pretty good. Yeah. Because there's one part of the book that I think was in Alan's list, where he does talk about, you think that based on his focus on rules that he would be a deontologist, but he's also very concerned about consequences and helping people. And these come into conflict as just like the trolley problem in general. Doing right and doing good in most cases will hopefully lead to the same decision, but they can conflict. They can conflict in that sometimes doing good means you'll have to do wrong. Yep. And that's the case of if he killed Bullseye, if he did kill Bullseye, it was setting aside what he knew was the right thing to do something that would create the most good.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the fact that he has to make this decision and constantly question whether he did the right thing is the ongoing conflict.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, and in our ethics and law class, I remember for the midterm, we had to apply, like we took one decision and we had to apply the two different schools of thought, in this case, obviously deontology and utilitarianism, and you had to make an argument for which one you thought was the right one to apply to that decision. And again, this is why philosophy is so important, man, because we're always making these ethical decisions. And I would argue for the most part, we're probably doing them more implicitly because we're basing it on, let's say, rules or
Sure.
religious beliefs, probably that we've been brought up with. But the point is to say that the study of ethics gives you a sense of freedom that you probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's what I say. I think in the lead up to my Captain America book, I say, that, when we're teaching ethics, like your professor did, we're not teaching you what to think. We're teaching you how to think about what you think. And if you come out of an ethics class with a firmer belief in the ethics you came in with, great. But you now know more about what those ethics mean.
Yeah.
If you come out with a different sets of ethics, that's great too. But even if you're a diehard utilitarian and you come into ethics class and you come out, wow, this is even better than I thought. Fantastic. But you were exposed to a lot of things that could either lead you to support your pre-existing beliefs or question.
Right.
Yeah.
But in either way, you're doing it with more information.
Yeah, I love that. All right, as we start to wrap up, Alan, final questions for Mark before we go?
Well, yeah, Mark, if we wanted to follow you, follow your work, and of course, buy the book, where can we do that?
The book should be available at most online booksellers, either as an ebook or as a printed book. My website is www.profmdwhite.com, and that Prof MD White is also my handle on the various social media platforms.
I love it, Mark. Thank you again, man. This was epic. I love all of these philosophical conversations, especially the fact that we can apply them to pop culture. Because oftentimes people think, like, what do I need to take an ethics class for? Like, didn't my parents already teach me what was moral?
Exactly. And that was the brilliance of William. We all know William Irwin. That's the brilliance of the series that he came up with the philosophy of pop culture. Is introducing basic philosophical ideas to the pop culture that people love. So I have to thank him, because without him, I wouldn't be doing this now.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. All right, man. 3-time guest. We'll have you back at sometime soon. So either we'll cover antitrust or whatever next Marvel book you're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Absolutely, man. We'll talk to you next time.
Care.
Take care.
All right. So, everyone, if you'd like to follow us, you can follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. On Twitter, we're at Seize_podcast. Like, subscribe, hit the bell on YouTube. And again, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.